What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's some of my final thoughts ahead of the Game Week 31 deadline. So I'm going to go through the press conference information that we've had so far, bearing in mind that we won't have had everything because it's a midweek game week. So some of the press conferences will be for today, and obviously I can't wait around for them because this video needs to go out so you can watch it. So we've got some quotes from managers, and then we've got some of your questions as well. And at the end, I'm going to talk about Wildcard 31. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's get into it. So I want to start by talking about what Arteta said about Saka after the game on Sunday, because a few people have asked me whether or not he's going to start against Luton. So this is what Arteta said. As you know, he's been out for a few weeks now with a little problem, and he was feeling that fatigue. So he missed the international break completely with England. That's the few weeks that he's talking about. Right now, he hasn't trained. He trained one day before the match. So he has trained, but only once. He had a big contribution, but 90 minutes were too much for him today. So he did come off in the 77th minute against Man City, and he did look like he was talking to the physio as he came off. That made people speculate that maybe he would miss the next match. Now, if we take Arteta at his word, and I think we've got to, right? I don't think he would lie about this straight after the game. Saka has had an issue, and it looks like they're trying to manage him. If you look at his minutes in recent games, he's only actually played 90 minutes once since game week 23. So even against Liverpool, he only played 78 minutes. And there's a lot of games where he's come off before the 80th minute. Although it's worth saying, in most of those games, Arsenal were absolutely cruising. Like there's 6-0s, 5-0s, etc. But against Brentford in game week 28, he did play 90 minutes. So it still looks like he's able to do that. But maybe against Man City, it was just too much. I don't think it's a case that Arteta is trying to cover up why he bought him off or anything like that. Maybe it is, but I don't think so, right? It seems to be that Saka is managing a bit of an injury. To me, it seems a bit like, without having all the inside info, it seems a bit like the Dominic Solanke injury, that he's able to play, but they've got to make sure it doesn't kind of get any worse. Now, all that out of the way, what about Saka moving forward? Could he get rotated against Luton? The answer is it's possible, right? I think it's possible for nearly any player to get rotated during midweek fixtures, especially when they've got another game or another quick turnaround the following weekend, which is what Arsenal have got, and then they've got Champions League as well. So if we look at Arsenal's fixtures, they played Sunday against City, the game against Luton is on Wednesday, then they've got another game against Brighton on Saturday, and then it's the first leg of their Champions League match on Tuesday. So it's a bit of a grueling schedule for Arsenal. But do I think Saka's going to get rotated against Luton? Not really, because he always plays. Do I think he's going to come off early? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of players like that. But I think he'll still start unless there's a genuine reason to keep him out of that team. Because one, he always starts, like I keep saying. And two, they're in a title race as well. I think on paper, Luton at home, Arsenal should be pretty comfortable in winning that. But you don't want to take it for granted, right? You don't want to just assume you're going to win it. So I think it'll be similar to like the West Ham, Burnley, Newcastle matches, where if they're winning comfortably, 3-0 or something like that at half-time, whatever it might be, then he gets brought off. Maybe at halftime, maybe 50, 60 minutes, whatever it is. I don't think he's going to play the full 90, that's for sure. In terms of captaincy, I still think it's someone that I would consider. I think when you've got Haaland against Villa at home, you've got Salah against Sheffield United at home, you probably don't need to captain Saka this week. I definitely wouldn't sell him. I think that's crazy is probably a bit too much, but I definitely wouldn't sell him, right? Because it's not just Luton. Brighton away is not a bad fixture for an attacker. Neither's Villa at home. And then you've got the double in 34. If you are free hitting in 34, maybe there's more reason to sell him. But even then, I wouldn't do it before Luton. And on Wildcard, that's completely up to you. And I guess it depends a little bit on chip strategy. I'd probably still have him because there's a good chance he does a lot. There's a good chance there's a lot of attacking returns against Luton at home. So summary is, there's clearly an issue that's ongoing with Saka, I think, judging by his minutes and kind of what Arteta has talked about, the fact he came off early against Man City. But I don't think it's enough to put me off Saka because I know what a good FPL pick he can be on his day. Like, don't forget, there was a time recently where people thought he was basically essential, right? If you look at, game week 22, 10 points against Forest, he returned every single game up until game week 27. I just think the fact that he's blanked against Brentford, now another blank against City, he's come off early, people are starting to get spooked a little bit. But I just wouldn't be surprised if he gets 1 or 2 attacking returns against Luton, no matter how many minutes he plays. So seems to be an issue, but not enough for me to worry about for FPL. All right, let's talk about Areola next because he is going to miss game week 31 against Spurs. David Moyes has now confirmed that. This is what he said. Alphonse has hurt his groin. We're hopeful that it's not too serious, but he won't be available on Tuesday night. He He might be back quite quickly, so we'll just have to see how things develop over the coming days. So they're playing Spurs on Tuesday and Wolves on Saturday. It is possible that he could be back for game week 32, but it's certainly not a guarantee. So this is what I would do. If you've got Areola and another playing goalkeeper, I would just play the other keeper instead. Even if their fixtures aren't the best, it's just probably not worth taking a hit for. If you're in a position where your team looks great this week and you're not making any transfers, maybe you make a goalkeeper change, but for most people, it's just not going to be worth it. If you've got Areola and a non-playing goalkeeper, then I would take a hit just to get someone in that's got a match this week and that can also cover you in game week 32, maybe game week 33. Who knows how long this might go on for. I know David Moyes has said he might be back quickly, but he hasn't guaranteed that. So if you've got no goalkeeper, I would take a hit or use a transfer. And obviously I wouldn't go for Areola on Wildcard or anything like that. In terms of who you should bring in, it probably depends on your chip strategy, but let's just assume you want someone with a double in game week 34. I quite like Pickford. The fixtures aren't necessarily ideal, but I think for 4.6 million, he's about as good as you're probably going to get. So Newcastle away, Burnley at home, Chelsea away next 3 game weeks, then the double of Forest and Liverpool at home in 34. At least you know he's definitely going to play, right? That's the key thing with Pickford. Neto has better fixtures for Bournemouth before the double, but a slightly worse double with 2 away games to Villa and Wolves. I don't think he's going to get dropped. I know there's a little bit of speculation about it. And Areola keeps getting... He's been asked about it a few times. I don't think it will happen, but there's enough doubt there where I probably just wouldn't buy him. I'd rather go for Pickford. Some people are going to talk about Kelleher for Liverpool. He's super cheap at 3.8 million. The fixtures are great. If you could guarantee me he plays every game between now and 34, he's obviously the one to go for. That guarantee isn't there. Alisson could be back at some point. And you will want, I would say, 3 Liverpool players for the double. You don't want to get blocked by having a goalkeeper that might not even play. So I'd probably ignore him. If you want someone like that, you could look at Raya instead. But he's a bit more money, right? He's 5 million. Arsenal fixture's pretty good before the double. Wolves away, Chelsea at home, not bad. In the double, great defence as well. He's probably the one I would look at if I had the money. But yeah, don't get him on wildcard, Areola, of course. If you've got a non-playing goalkeeper alongside him, take a hit, I would say, to replace the goalkeeper. And if you've got someone that plays, just play them instead. So for anyone that's been looking at Cunha as a cheap forward option ahead of Wolves double in game week 34, it's good news. Gary O'Neill confirmed he'll definitely be in the matchday squad to face Burnley in game week 31. That doesn't mean that he's definitely starting, but at a bare minimum, he'll be on the bench, hopefully come on and get some minutes, and then possibly be ready to start against West Ham in game week 32. We know at least when Cunha is fully fit, he will start for Wolves. It's just a matter of when that is. And I quite like the double in 34 for Wolves. I know they've got to play Arsenal, but it's at least a home game. They will cause them some problems. And then you've got Bournemouth at home as well. So I get why people are looking at him. He's 5.5 million, so he's a bit more expensive than Mateta, Muniz and Semenyo. But for a lot of people, will still fund the move for Salah. The question is, would I risk him knowing that he's not necessarily fully fit right now, rather than going for someone else with a double in 34? I do think if he, Semenyo and Mateta all were to play both games in the double, I think Cunha is the best option, and he could be on penalties as well. And for that reason, I probably would risk it, because I quite like Wolves fixtures in general. And if you do get him for the double, it looks great. I guess it would depend on how many other transfers you're setting yourself up for. If you've got like a really tight plan where every week you're using every single transfer, and if you bring Cunha in and then he gets injured again, you have to take a hit to get him out. Maybe in that case, I just go for someone that you know right now is fine, like Mateta. But for most people, I would just probably risk it, because the upside is definitely there if he plays in 34. And I think people were a little bit surprised that he wasn't in the last squad for game week 30. So maybe they've just been really careful with him. And then from 32 onwards, hopefully he'll be fine. I guess you've just got to bring him in knowing there's a chance it's a benching against Burnley, and it could be another benching against West Ham if they're being extra careful with him. But for most people who are bringing in a cheap forward, it's to sit on the bench until game week 34. So you've at least got a few weeks until you actually need him. So I think I'd probably risk it, but know that it is a little bit of a risk. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So who would you sell out of Son or Saka to get Salah in? Most of us have no issue selling Foden or Maddison, but might not have the funds. For example, the combination would be Salah and Mateta if I sell Foden, or Salah and Nunez if I sell Son or Saka. Now, just on those combinations, in an ideal world, you definitely want double Liverpool attack against Sheffield United, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So if you went for the Salah and Mateta route, and Mateta was going to sit on your bench until double game week 34, and ahead of Liverpool's double in 34, you're able to bring in Diaz or Nunez later on, maybe in game weeks 32 or 33 or even 34 instead, that might be a better route because you get to sell Foden instead of Son or Saka. And it's worth saying, right, I've sold Foden. I think he's a great option. If you can keep hold of him, you absolutely should. But I think out of him, Son and Saka, Foden is probably the worst option of the three. The other two are pretty much guaranteed to play. The minutes are secure, especially with Son. They're both on penalties. And look, I think Foden starts are probably going to be fine. He'll probably start the next 3 games, but there's at least a little bit of doubt there, and he's definitely not on penalties. So that's why I think he's the better option to sell over Son or Saka. And Maddison is probably quite easy to get rid of at the moment. So if it's a case of sell Foden, get Salah and Mateta, but also get Diaz or Nunez later on, I quite like that option, even though it would obviously be nice to have double Liverpool attack this week. So that's just that bit covered. Out of Son or Saka, who would I sell to get Salah in? Probably Son. I wouldn't like it, but I think you've got to keep Saka for Luton at home. And unless you're free hitting in game week 34, you're going to want him for that double game week. Whereas for Son, it's a blank game week. I think over the next 3, there's every chance that Son could outscore Saka because of Champions League and stuff like that. Saka's minutes might be managed a bit more than Son's probably will be, right? Because Spurs don't have any other competitions to play for at the moment. So I'd probably sell Son, but I wouldn't like it. But I think you've got to keep Saka ahead of that double in 34. If you're free hitting in 34, maybe you could sell Saka instead, but I still wouldn't want to do that ahead of Luton at home unless you were convinced that he's going to get benched, in which case I would definitely do it. So that's probably where I would sit. I think it's perfectly fine to get Nunez or Diaz later if it fits better in your transfer plans, which might include selling Foden instead of Son or Saka. Hopefully that makes sense. Good luck with that decision. All right, nice and simple. Would you go for double Arsenal defence or double Arsenal attack for game weeks 31 to 34? So from now until their double game week. Now, I've had double Arsenal defence for a very long time, so maybe I'm a little bit more biased towards that. I haven't had to think about their attackers, for ages now. But I still think I would stick with double defence. Like maybe on free hit in 34 itself, I'd go for double attack as a bit of a differential. But as a use of transfers, I still think I would stick with double defence. And the reason is the combinations and the other options you can go for in those positions. So if I look at my own team, right, let's forget the forwards for a second because no one's buying Gabriel Jesus, I don't think. The main attackers to look at are probably Saka, Havertz and Odegaard. So in my midfield, I've got Palmer, Salah, Son and Saka. So if I wanted to put in Havertz or Odegaard, I've got to get rid of one of Son, Salah or Palmer. And I just don't really want to do that. Now, of course, I could play 3-5-2, drop one of Solanke or Darwin Nunez to a cheap forward and play with Odegaard or Havertz. But are they better than Darwin or Solanke? I'm not convinced they are. And even if they are, it's not really a big gap or anything like that. But if I drop one of Gabriel or Saliba, which defender do I put in? Right? Everyone's complaining about the lack of clean sheets and stuff like that. Why should we use transfers on defenders? Well, Arsenal defenders are perfect. They're nailed on. Best defence in the league. And they've got attacking threat as well from set pieces. You could go for Ben White instead of Saliba if you wanted to. But they're really good options. If I had to get rid of one, like do I go for a Spurs defender? Well, they've got West Ham away, Forest at home, Newcastle away, and then a blank. Now, Forest at home's fine, but 2 away games and a blank. I mean, I wouldn't mind having Porro or Doggy. I probably would have selected them on Wildcard last week, but I'm not sure I'd want to transfer one in instead of an Arsenal defender. Like Man City defender like Vardio could work, but are they better than Saliba or Gabriel? And then you think of it as a combination, right? So let's just say I get rid of Solanke. Let's just say I get rid of Darwin Nunez and go for 3-5-2. Saliba and Darwin or Vardio and Odegaard. I mean, I think it's pretty simple, right? It's the Arsenal defender, I think, and Darwin Nunez. It is for me, at least. So that's my main... I don't have an issue with double attack at all. If people want to go for it, I actually quite like it as a differential. But there's not many attackers that I would want to drop. And I'd rather have like Foden and Saliba rather than Vardio and Odegaard. Put it that way. So there's lots of other attackers from different teams. And for me, the defence has just been great. You just don't have to worry about them. And look, do I think it's ideal to have to play double defence against Brighton away and Villa at home? Not necessarily. But it's also not particularly worrying either because you know if they concede, you've got the chance of a set-piece goal, right? So a header from a set-piece. So I think I would stick to double defence. There's nothing wrong with double attack whatsoever. I just think with the options available, defence probably makes more sense. On free hit, maybe not quite so much. But as a use of transfers for 31 to 34, I'd probably stick with the double defence. So is Luis Diaz a good alternative to Darwin Núñez? And the simple answer is yes, he absolutely is. And if it fits your transfer plans better to get Diaz instead of Darwin, that is exactly what I would do. I wouldn't start spending -4s, -8s just to get Darwin if I could get Diaz for free. Now, if they were to play the same amount of minutes from game weeks 31 right up until the double in 34, my money would be on Darwin scoring more points because his underlying numbers are absolutely ridiculous. But I wouldn't put a huge amount of money on that. It's far from guaranteed. And it's also not guaranteed they would play the same minutes. Maybe Diaz plays even more than Darwin does over those few game weeks. So I think he's a great alternative. For my moves this week, I did bring Darwin in, as I spoke about yesterday. I could have gone for Diaz instead, but it would have cost the same -4. If I could have got Diaz for free, rather than spending the -4 on Darwin, I might have gone for that, but I needed to free up funds, whichever player I wanted to go for. So if I'd done Fernandes to Salah and Foden to Diaz, I would have still had to sell Watkins to a cheap forward instead to fund that move. So it would have still cost me 4 points. So in the end, I went for Sarabia and Darwin instead of Diaz and Mateta, essentially, or Diaz and Cunha, I guess, right? So that's the combination I went for because I do prefer Darwin Núñez in isolation versus Diaz. But yeah, if you've got a much better route to get a midfielder in, then go for that instead. Diaz is great. So given Haaland's returns of late, is it time to get rid? And a lot of people have asked me about this. And I think what's playing a part in this discussion is the fact that we've had the international break and Man City blanked in game week 29. So in terms of returns in the league, it feels like forever since Haaland got one. But if you look at the game weeks that Man City have played, it's actually not that bad. Okay, he blanked against Arsenal. Arsenal, best defence in the league. Saliba and Gabriel did really well against him. Haaland didn't play particularly well either. But whatever, right? Any attacker can blank against Arsenal. It happens. Then you got Liverpool away in game week 28, which I didn't think was a particularly good fixture. I never even thought about captaining him that week. Lots of people sold to Morris ahead of the double for Luton plus the game in 29. Perfectly good move. But ultimately, Liverpool away and Arsenal at home on paper wasn't fantastic. But you look before that, and he returned against Man United in game week 27. Okay, he only finished on 6 points, but it's only 3 game weeks ago for Man City that he returned. It's not like it's 3, 4, 5, 6 games where he hasn't had anything in the league. So I don't think it's that bad. And if you go back a bit further down to game week 23, when he came back after injury, he got 6 returns in the next 6 matches. It's only the Liverpool and Arsenal games which are now making us think maybe we should sell him. So I don't think it's too much of an issue. I think sometimes people focus too much on what's happened. Right? You can't change it, right? You kept him for Liverpool and Arsenal. It is what it is. The real question is, do you think he's going to get returns against Villa at home, Palace away, and Luton at home? I think the answer is probably yes. Like, will he go and get another 3 returns over those 3 games, possibly even more? Absolutely. He's fully capable of doing that. It's not a guarantee. And maybe his minutes will be managed. Maybe that'll be an issue. And obviously you can assess that yourself. If you think he's going to get rested for one of those games, maybe it is time to get rid. But I don't think it's that likely. I think he'll probably play Villa, Palace and Luton, even with Champions League matches. And therefore, I think for most people, it makes sense just to keep hold of him. I mean, I always say this, right? He's not essential. If you want to get rid, you absolutely should. But what is getting rid of him gaining you elsewhere? Again, coming back to my own team, because that's the only thing I can talk about, personally. If I sell Haaland, what do I gain? I've already got Salah, Son, Saka, Palmer, Darwin and Solanke. Maybe I get a slightly better bench option. I just don't think I'm gaining enough. And I probably will captain him against Luton. So I think with the Haaland discussion, there's too much focus on what's happened the last 2 game weeks. And I think because we've had essentially 3 weeks off from Man City, game week 29 and the international break, it just feels like forever since he got anything. But actually, it's not that long ago. I think it's quite easy to forget how good he is. Yes, it wasn't great against Arsenal, but the Villa, Palace and Luton defence are not that good. He will get chances. It could be that in 3 game weeks' time, I'm sat here getting questions, well, you were stupid to keep Haaland. Of course he wasn't going to do anything. But I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden he starts to feel to a lot of people like he's essential again. So I've got no interest in getting rid of him anytime soon. And I think while the title race is open, he's going to continue to start. So what are the benefits of Bench Boost 34 and Free Hit 37 versus Free Hit 34 and Bench Boost 37? I think everyone is disregarding the former because of Spurs and Chelsea doubles later, but the fixtures don't look good. Now, the big benefit of going for your Bench Boost in 34 is it's closer to your wildcard. So if you wildcarded in game week 30 or 31, you get to bench boost in a few weeks, and hopefully you won't get hit too badly with injuries and suspensions and stuff like that. I realise I'm saying that after Lascelles and Gusto just got injured, but generally you want to bench boost as close as you can. So great. And then later on in the season, there'll probably be a bit of rotation because, you know, maybe the league title is over, maybe European places are done, whatever it might be, there could be more rotation. And so you free hit much closer to the end of the season and just pick the double game week players that you want. So that's the benefit. But for me, because of Spurs and Chelsea, I would go the other way around because, yes, on paper, the fixtures aren't ideal, but you're still getting extra fixtures. But not only that, like Son right now is great. Palmer right now is great. I think a second Spurs player could be good. Obviously, a lot of people went Gusto, Petrovic. They've been a little bit screwed over with that. But there's reasons to have those players now. And then Spurs blank in 34 and Chelsea have got Arsenal away. It's the perfect week to get rid of them to then have them later on for their extra doubles. And if I look at what Spurs' schedule would be like, okay, Arsenal at home in 35 is tough. The double in 36 could be Liverpool away and Chelsea away. Now, look, it's not great to have 2 away games against those 2 teams, but someone like Son could get you something in there. Second attacker as well, possibly. Defenders maybe less so, I get that. And then the double in 37 would be Burnley at home and City at home. And City always tend to struggle against Spurs away from home. And you get that Burnley fixture as well. And you get Sheffield United away in game week 38. And then for Chelsea, it's Villa at home in 35. The double in 36 would be West Ham at home and Spurs at home. So 2 home games. And then in 37, it's Forest away and Brighton away. And then it's Bournemouth at home in game week 38. So I actually think the fixtures afterwards are okay. And because of the additional 2 games, I will definitely want players from those teams. Does it mean you have to triple up on both of them? No. But I just don't think there's enough advantage with Bench Boost 34 to warrant going for it when you could just free hit those players out and have them later on. But look, there's pros and cons to both. It could be the people that Bench Boost 34 absolutely smash it. And then there's loads of injuries, loads of rotation, and free hit later on could be better. But I just think because you're going to want a few Spurs and Chelsea players now, it makes sense just to free hit them out and have them later on. But ultimately, you can do whichever you like. So lots and lots of people asked me to cover Wildcard for Game Week 31, but because of the quick turnaround, there wasn't enough time to do a separate video. So I'm just going to include a section here instead. This is the draft I've come up with. I will say, I found it quite difficult to build a draft that would suit everybody because everyone's got different chips, right? Some people are free hitting in 34. Some people want to bench boost that week. Some people have got no chips whatsoever. So I would consider this a base draft that you can then build upon, right? If you're bench boosting in 34, add more players with a double that week. If you're free hitting 34, you could even take some of these players out and go a little bit of a different route. And I'll try and speak about that as I go through. So in goal, I've got Raya for Arsenal and then Petrovic on the bench because Chelsea have got that double in 37. Arsenal have the double in 34. The defenders, Vardiol, Gabriel, Van Dijk is my back 3. So it's a double up on Arsenal defensive options, but instead of Gabriel and Saliba, I've gone for Raya and Gabriel. Obviously, right, if you're free hitting in 34, you could go for someone like a Nana or Edison along with Petrovic because they will all double in 37 if that's when you're bench boosting. But I quite like Arsenal's fixtures in the short term. Plus, they got the double in 34. So that's why Ray is in there. And that's why Gabriel is as well. Like I discussed earlier, double Arsenal attack, perfectly fine. But there's lots of good attacking options. On the bench, Dan Burn and Mykolenko. Now, Newcastle defence has not been good for a long time. I get that. If you don't want to go with Dan Burn, I completely understand. The reason he's in there is because the fixtures are still good. There's a double in 37 that I'm thinking ahead to. He should be absolutely nailed on with the amount of injuries they've got. He pretty much was anyway, and he's quite cheap. But if you wanted to go for someone else, perfectly reasonable, I think, to do that. And obviously, if you're bench boosting in 34, I would definitely switch him to someone else too. With Mykolenko, that could be Tarkowski, it could be Ain't Nuri. That's basically someone with a double game week in game week 34. But again, if you're bench boosting in 37 and you don't need that doubler in 34 because you're free hitting, you can change to someone else. The 2 defenders that I think people will ask me about are Bradley and Gusto. I think it's perfectly reasonable to risk Gusto, especially if you're not setting yourself up for many more transfers. So if you're free hitting 34, I would probably go for Gusto instead of Mykolenko and just hope that he's back soon. And then you've got him for that double later on. With Bradley, I would only consider him if, again, you're free hitting in game week 34. Because, yes, he'll almost certainly... Well, he'll definitely play some part against Sheffield United, hopefully from the start, not guaranteed. and then you could always switch him to someone else, and you don't need to worry about having 3 Liverpool defenders. 3 Liverpool players, because you're obviously free hitting in 34. If you're not using your free hit in 34, I probably wouldn't start with Bradley, because it's a definite transfer, I would say, to someone else, either to a different team completely, and then a second transfer to bring in a third Liverpool player, or you're having to use a transfer to go from Bradley to Van Dijk. So I'd prefer just to get Van Dijk in from the start. But again, it's going to depend a lot on your chip strategy. It's also worth saying, to get that defence, because the Wildcard 30 draft I built was a lot cheaper defence, I've had to make a sacrifice in midfield, which is no Foden and no Son. So I've gone for Palmer, Salah, Sarabia and Saka as my midfield 4. And then I've got Gordon on the bench, who's suspended now, but he'll be back for game week 32. Newcastle's fixtures are good. He's nailed on. And again, you've got that double later on. You can pick and choose if you want to change him to someone else. Would I include Son? If I was free hitting in 34, probably. But I think if you do that, you've then got to sacrifice a lot of those defenders. So maybe you could do Van Dijk to Gusto and then a few other changes. If that lets you get Son instead of Sarabia or Son instead of Gordon, I would probably do that. I have got the money where I could go Son instead of Saka. I just think I would want Saka for Luton at home. You can always move him on later on. So Son is definitely a big miss in this team, and probably the biggest miss out of everyone that I would like to put in here. Again, Foden is great, but I don't think he's an absolute must right now. And it's not that Son's a must either, but if I was putting one of those two in, it would absolutely be the Spurs man. Salah's obvious. Saka, fairly obvious. He could be changed if you wanted to. Palmer's just too good value to turn down. And then Sarabia's got that double in game week 34. If you were, again, bench boosting in 37 instead, I'd maybe go for Garnacho over Sarabia, but you'd have to play him this week, and Man United have got Chelsea away. So it's not necessarily the best fixture, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. And then up front, I've got Haaland, Darwin and Solanke. Darwin, I think, would definitely be in for me because of the Sheffield United game and the double in 34. And Haaland, I've already talked about quite a lot. Solanke could be changed. Again, if you're free hitting in 34, I probably would have Isak instead of Solanke. You free hit him out in 34. You've got him later on for those Newcastle fixtures. So the key players in this squad who'd be in, not no matter what, but in most combinations of chips are probably Salah, Palmer, Gabriel, Petrovic, Haaland, I would say, and probably Darwin Núñez. I think Solanke could be Isak, Saka could be Son, Sarabia could be Garnacho, Bernal Mikalenko could be Bradley or Gusto. And obviously with the goalkeepers, if you're free hitting 34, you could go for Petrovic and Edison, or Petrovic and Onana, or Onana and Edison, whichever combination you want to go for. But I think that's a pretty good starting draft. You then have to decide where you want to make the sacrifices. Like Guardiola, for example, good fixtures in the short term, but long term, if everyone gets back fit for Man City, his minutes are going to be an issue. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable if you wanted to drop him and go for someone else instead. I don't think there's too much more I can really say on this now without building like 6 different drafts, depending on what chips people have got. Like, what other options have I missed out? For Arsenal, you could go for Ben White, Saliba, Odegaard, Havertz. For Liverpool, you could go for Diaz instead. Perfectly reasonable. Ultimately, you just need to look at your chips and balance the amount of players you need. If you've got no chips whatsoever, I think 8 to 9 double game weekers is fine. So in this one, I've got Raya, Gabriel, Van Dijk, Salah, Sarabia, Saka, Solanke, Darwin, and Mikalenko. So that's 9 double game week players for 34 without using any chips. And obviously longer term, you just look to move them on for doublers that have got games in 37. So it's not bad. You could probably build a different draft that would look just as good. So don't take it that if your draft looks completely different, it's terrible. That's probably not the case. You've probably just got slightly different preferences to players, but also you might have chips to use as well. I've probably said chips about 1 million times in this section, so I'm just going to leave it there. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Remember, the deadline is 6 p.m. UK time today. I will be streaming from 4 p.m. for the deadline stream. So if you want to tune in for that, make sure you do. Otherwise, I'll catch you probably on Thursday now for the content starting ahead of game week 32.